Long ago the clock washed midnight away, bringing the dawn. Oh God, I must be dreaming. Time to get up again and time to start up again. Pulling on my socks now. Where did the night go?
Welcome everybody to this panel on governance and design for diverse cities at NITE. My name's Lo Marshall and I'm going to co-host this session with my colleague from the NITE London team, Ben Campkin. So we previously arranged this panel for the UCL NITE London conference, which was called Night Scenes last year, and some of you joined us there as well. But regrettably, we had to postpone due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then we'd hoped to be able to reschedule it to take place in person in Berlin, but here we are back on Zoom again. And although we'd love to be together with you, we're delighted to be able to host this extremely distinguished panel speaking from locations across Europe, and to know that the event's being attended by people coming from many different places and time zones in a way that might not otherwise have been possible. We're very privileged to bring together this panel: Mirik, Milan, Joanne, Cox Brown, Mykaell Riley, Bryony, Benyon, and Kolvin, who are uniquely positioned to inform and stimulate our thoughts on questions around governance and the design of diverse cities at NITE from multiple angles and scales. I'm sure you're going to have plenty of questions and comments for them, so please keep hold of these and post them in the chat once all of the talks are complete, and we'll be having a discussion and Q&A.
Hello, my name is Ben Campkin and I'm very happy to be co-hosting this panel with Lo. So in conceiving of the NITE research project that we're working as part of, as scholars in the arts and humanities and social sciences, we were aware of cities at NITE as a growing topic in many disciplines, as well as in many arenas of public and professional debate. Authorities have historically wrestled with the issue of nighttime control, and in some contexts, the hours after dark are often still perceived as harboring threats to public order and potential criminality. This was one of the touchstones of the framing of our project. Yet, building on studies that have been undertaken increasingly since the 1990s, current policy attention to nighttime urban economies, exemplified by the creation of NITE offices, indicates an increasing and more positive interest in the potentials of cities and culture at night. Distinctive local and transnational networks and communities of practice have formed and have made the case for a shift away from the night as a problem to be solved or policed, to a more nuanced understanding of the potentials, challenges, actors, and diversity of activities. These have increasingly raised important issues, such as the need for participatory structures across a variety of formal and informal institutions, or to protect social and cultural nocturnal infrastructures in contexts of rapid gentrification. The pandemic has, of course, created huge challenges for nighttime industries, practices, and communities globally, as well as witnessing local and global innovation and collaboration, not least through digital augmentation, which is this conference's theme. Our panel are leaders in these areas, and while we know that they will have specific things that they would like to raise and interrogate, with our project and conference themes in mind, we've posed various questions to them to help frame a common conversation. And at the close of the panel's interventions, we invite you to pick up on these questions too. If inequalities are magnified at night and issues of safety are paramount, how can these be addressed through policy and practice interventions? How do questions of culture, migration, integration, and internationalism manifest in the management of cities after dark? What have been the impacts of digital technology on the urban night through the pandemic? During the COVID-19 pandemic, nightlife has emerged and adapted using online platforms. What can we learn from these digital transformations, and do they have a future in post-pandemic nightlife?
We've asked each panelist to speak from their varied professional perspectives and experiences, as well as reflecting on the impacts of the pandemic and future recovery. We're going to begin with Mirik Milan. Mirik is a nightlife consultant and co-founder of Vibelab, a leading consultancy agency developing strategies and trailblazing research into life at night. As one of the first night mayors in the world, Mirik has played an instrumental role in reshaping Amsterdam's nightlife scene into one of the most vibrant and economically robust in the world. And his innovative position has been replicated in major cities, including New York, Paris, and London. Thanks, Mirik, over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for that lovely introduction, and really great to see also a lot of familiar names. there are no faces at this moment, but a lot of familiar names. So welcome to everyone here. I have 10 minutes for this presentation, so let's dive straight into it. I will, as we do nowadays, share my screen with you all, and let's see if technology will help us. So if you could say, if somebody could give me a wink or not that you're seeing this okay, then I will kick right off.
Looks great.
I can see it.
Okay, okay, thanks. Okay, so yeah, Vibelab, a laboratory for vibes. That's who we are. Today I'm going to speak about the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan. That is a project that we have set up when the pandemic hit. And I will give some insights in what I think the NITE should focus on moving forward from here onwards. As a small statement to begin with, I really think that the NITE is not only in lockdown or nightlife or the NITE in general, but it's really in metamorphosis, and also this is the moment to do things, to try to rethink the NITE and do things better. And we really need to realize that, you know, where nightlife really often came as a protest or came as a way for people to express themselves, and really that is the core of what nightlife is, and that's also what we need to protect. And that's also so great why that all these institutions are doing this research in this field and the topic of this night. So so this is actually so this is the agenda which I mentioned before. Vibelab, purpose-driven consultancy. What we always try to do is funnel the money from cities or from brands to the nightlife scene for them to develop their talent. We are very much rooted in advocacy because, of course, my role of the NITE mayor and also from Lutz, but we also added a layer of research to it in the recent years by developing our own strategies. So Vibelab is Lutz and me. Lutz is the club commissioner in Berlin, the spokesman. I was the NITE mayor of Amsterdam for 6 years. And we also created a project during the pandemic, which called United We Stream. And United We Stream is now is an online and digital platform in more than 120 cities around the world, and where people can, nightclubs and venues can stay in contact with their audience by live streaming. Never being replaced, it will never replace nightlife live streaming, but it's a good way to still be connected to your audience and to make sure that people remember who you are. So these are the recent researchers and projects that we have done. I encourage you to read our the nighttime governance study that I was the co-author of, together with Andrena Sellas, Governing the Nighttime City: The Rise of Night Mayors and a New Form of Urban Governance. Took us two years to create. You're all researchers and scientists, so for me it was a really big thing to be able to get an official publication in a scientific journal. Next week we'll release the Voices of Creatives, a study that we have done in 6 countries, in new territories for us in the Middle East and sub-Saharan territories. On the 28th, we're going to release this report. I hope you'll have a look and or download it, of course. The Creative Footprint, our own methodology, where we mapping and assessing creative space, also something, have a look. And of course, the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, which I will be speaking about a bit later. These are the topics that we are involved in when it comes to nighttime advocacy, and probably a lot of topics many of you will be familiar to. And this is really what for us makes up what makes up nighttime governance, and what are really important topics to jump into. I'm not going to read them all out. You are fast readers, so you can read them yourself, but these are the topics that we are really focusing on, making sure that city governments or other stakeholders are aware and that are all connected to nighttime governance. So what are the ingredients to create a buzz? we really strongly believe, or does not, we don't strongly believe, we always see this happening in every city that we go to, is it's always a combination of the creative community, the creative space, and the policy framework that a city provides. The creative community is what makes an attractive city. It's what makes a city attractive. There's where the innovation happens. They create content, but they need space to create content. Creative space is something which is super under pressure, of course, nowadays in our urban environments. The pandemic hit, a lot of people in nightlife lost their job, but the ground prices and house prices only went up. So creative space will be even more under pressure. But the policy framework makes sure that creative people can develop their talents. That's where capacity is built by testing and trying and daring to fail. People in nightlife develop their talents develop their talent. And by having the right policies in place, you really empower these creative communities. You know, it empowers them to develop their talents. And this all together, this is really what we believe that nightlife is all about, or the nighttime is all about. Nightlife has sometimes such a negative connotation about only that a lot of people don't really understand what it is, but cultural relevant nightlife really empowers people and really makes cities unique and is a driving force from social, cultural, and economic perspective. These are the three dimensions that we have that we are always working on when it comes to the nighttime economy, or what is the principles for collaboration, cultural, social, and economic. And these are very crucial parts of developing the city, and which we always run into. Okay. So if we go into the GNRP, Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, which is a project that we have set up at the beginning of the pandemic, and what we did is we created a WhatsApp group with a lot of night mayors, practitioners from all around the world at the beginning of the pandemic, and everybody was directly exchanging. A lot of you are also in this group, and there's also a nighttime science group where we invited also a lot of you into. There was a lot of exchange with this information, and that's why we started to think, hey, we need to bring this information together. We were filtering their information, and that made us the decision, why aren't we not publishing something to help cities, but also to help nighttime advocates, you know, to better advocate for their scenes in the cities where they live in. So it's a practical guide. We started to organize the chapters, and we really were listening and learning and reading and sucking it all in and publishing in a white paper that we do every 2 months, more or less. We publish a chapter. I think we have now 5 chapters which are out. I encourage you to download them through nighttime.org, a simple blog website where we are organized for everyone who is organizing the night. And we always do a meet the authors call at the end to give publicity to the people that worked on each chapter. I'm going to run you through some insights from each chapter that we did. And the first chapter was all about the open air, the outdoor space. Was relevant in May, June last year, and now it's a year later, it's again relevant. So there are still cities that are thinking, okay, how can we now use the public space to give way to nighttime communities? The second chapter was all about the future of dance floors. We were heavily in the digital formats that came up. Everybody was finding a way to adapt to this new industry, how it was built. But it was also important to measure and monitor and to identify what are the challenges and opportunities. What is the future of our dance floors? We need to make sure that it is more and more equitable space. Somebody was really inspiring to me, said that diversity is about being invited to the party. Inclusion is about being able to dance at the party, and equity is of course being paid also for your services. And I think that's really, I really strongly believe in that, and that's something we need to focus on. But it's also a very difficult topic, and I think we have to try the best as we can, or we at least are trying to learn and listen as much as we can, and trying to make sure that people which are in decision-making positions do the right thing to have a better organized nighttime scene. The third chapter was really about the 24-hour economy and the 24-hour cities, how cities are being organized at night and in the nocturnal hours. We spoke about lighting in the public space, how that creates also more safety, but also thinking about, okay, what is how's transportation organized at night? A healthy nighttime economy requires vision and design, planning, ongoing measures, and targeted communication campaigns. That's really what we believe that nighttime governance is all about. It's really about bringing different stakeholders together and making sure that everybody speaks to each other. Because really often at night, the first reactions of cities officials or other people is, hey, we have to stop this now, instead of bringing the smart people together and trying to do something new. That has gained us a lot of success in Amsterdam, but I see it also happening in other cities. But it's really easy to leave these things behind. Then the fourth chapter was all about the people that worked at night. We did surveys with more than 700 people in five continents. Really, people that worked at night, and really start to understand what the needs are of the different people that work at night. Looking at emergency grants for artists, but also to the rise of the direct to artist patronage projects. Without greater, more targeted, long-lasting support structures, many nightlife workers will not be able to continue in the industry. You really see, like, the top 10 in the industry, they will always survive. But what happens to more people in the mid-level, in the people which are working in the mid-level sector? For them, it's very difficult to switch out of the nighttime scene. There has been a really, really big brain drain, and a lot of capacity was lost over the recent years, because a lot of people that were, when you're older and you're longer in this industry, then it's not possible to not work for a year. You have a house, you have a mortgage, you have children, you need to provide for yourself. So there's a lot of knowledge has been lost the recent years, and we really hope that these mid-level operators, because they are also the ones that can grow, that can build back the industry the biggest. So I really hope that we'll get recognition. In many cities there was support for nightlife workers, of course, but also in many cities there hasn't been any support, and a lot of our friends, definitely in Latin America, have been really bleeding. Have been really bleeding the last year. So what can cities do? So we made some. We had a 5-point plan, which we want to show: online toolboxes, smart apps, special regulations and pilots, monitoring and support. And then sorry, I can't get rid of this. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Mirik, just to say that you're slightly over time now, so I'm
already over time. Great. Yeah, no
Thank
worries.
you.
I'm going to the last slide then. Influence factors of the pandemic. Retail will remain largely online. Less need for office space. Gen Z missed education opportunities. COVID-19 policy decisions were not supportive of creative industries. Tendency to more local, and also access to digital markets, compensation to the local losses. So I'm going to close off with what I think are the solutions: supportive, creative hub concepts and multidisciplinary spaces to make sure to go into those spaces that remain empty. I think we need to reinstall the chain of talent development with accelerator programming, mentoring programs, but also supportive policies and framework, building inclusive and equitable local and international connected communities and access to global digital markets. That's really how we can build back the industry. Thank you for this moment.
Thank you so much, and sorry to interject. It was really fascinating to hear the overview of all of the exciting initiatives there, and so beautifully clearly presented in what you said, but also in these diagrams, which really help us conceptualize this global phenomenon, really, and amazing work that you've been doing. So I'm looking forward to picking up on that. Thank you. So thank you. Thanks very much, Mirik. So I'm very pleased now to introduce Jo Cox Brown, who's our next speaker. Jo is the founding director of Nighttime Economy Solutions and has worked in the hospitality and nighttime economy industry for over 13 years in roles such as being chief executive officer for a charity created to turn Nottingham's nightlife around, and being nighttime economy manager for Manchester City Centre. She's also an expert appointed to the High Streets Task Force, and during the pandemic, Jo and her team have supported over 6,000 businesses in 40 towns and cities to adhere to the ever-changing legislation and guidelines. So I'm very pleased to hand the floor to Jo and welcome her.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Mirik, that was a really fascinating presentation, and it shared a lot of the learnings that my team and I have had over the last year in working across so many cities. So I'd love to catch up with you at some point if I could, and learn some more. So yeah, I won't go into the kind of work we've done, but I will move over into the questions. So one of the questions was, if inequalities are magnified at night and the issues of safety are paramount, how can these be addressed through policy and practice interventions? So one of the things that we have discovered across working across 40 towns and cities across the UK over lockdown and pre-lockdown is those making policy very rarely look at the fullness of their area at night. So they may understand one specific area like policing or cleansing or lighting or nightclubs or fast food restaurants, but they actually really very rarely go into the area and spend an entire night looking at the fullness of everything that happens in that area. Therefore, they don't really understand what the inequalities are, because they don't understand the people who are using it, the businesses that are using it, the staff who are working in it, the issues around getting home safely, and even the impact of the policies that they're making on those areas. They don't often have a really good dialogue between councils, police forces, businesses, workers, those who are emerging in the nightlife industry, venue owners, business owners, and therefore it becomes really hard for them to understand issues of safety. We often find that cities are very male-led as well, still, unfortunately. Therefore, it becomes really difficult for them to understand issues of safety reporting to kind of women or the LGBT community or those who are working in the cities at night. And I know one of my clients, who is a major multinational fast food restaurant, constantly struggles to get 24-hour licenses, and often are then having to send their staff home at 3 in the morning when they're being told by the local councils they have to close because they haven't got a license. But that puts their staff in extreme danger going home at night, whereas if they were given a 24-hour license, their staff would be able to get transferred home much easier. And particularly for women and young people working at night, that's really important. So one of the things that we always do as a team is we work with the towns and cities that we work with, and we ask them to do nighttime audits, and we work with them to do a nighttime audit once a quarter. And this enables them to look at the fullness of their area at night. So we go out, we start the night at 6 p.m. and we bring an entire strategic team together to go and then look at what it looks like. We arrange interviews with those who are working, those who run businesses, those who aren't using the nighttime economy at all. And in understanding that fullness of the nighttime economy, it gives them a much greater understanding and therefore an ability to make much better strategic, smarter policies and practices as a result of it. And we have seen huge strides. So in Nottingham, for example, where I first started working, it was once labelled the worst city in the country for violence and antisocial behaviour. But now, as a result of prolonged activity that we've done, including things like audits and really understanding our city, we are now considered the safest city in the UK as a result of the work that has gone on there. So it's really important in terms of understanding the issues that are in there and the inequalities is to both understand users, so people who currently use that nighttime economy, but also non-users. And we have a really good example of this. So in Leicester, where we worked for a prolonged period of time, they have a really high Asian community. Now, the Asian community were not using Leicester at all at night. And the reason that they weren't using Leicester at all at night was because they don't drink alcohol. And yet at Leicester's nighttime economy was very focused on an alcohol-driven nighttime economy. So we worked with them to then look at what else needed to happen in their nighttime economy, putting in things like a nightclub with no alcohol, which was pre-COVID very well attended, putting in things like ice cream shops and coffee shops and other activities that weren't focused on alcohol, festivals surrounding the Asian calendar of festivals and events. And that brought in a new group of people into the city centre, increasing footfall. So it's really important to understand both users, non-users, using things like focus groups, e-surveys, street research, and also then the use of data. Cities are filled with rich data that often isn't exploited in any way, shape or form to the way that it could be. So we have a data team of 3 people who are constantly looking in the cities that we work with at things such as footfall data, GOAD data, data on kind of police and crime data, antisocial behaviour data, and we're constantly looking at how this is changing in towns and cities and then how we can make best use of it. We often find as well that projects are rolled out. So at the moment, people are coming to us and they're approaching us about female safety projects. But what we found in the past is when they've rolled out projects, they haven't evaluated those projects to see whether or not they overcome the issues or whether they magnify the issues. So for example, Nottingham was the first city to roll out that sexism in the street was a hate crime. And we've done a really big piece of evaluation on that to really understand how many people are actually reporting sexism as a hate crime in the nighttime economy, what have the impact of those projects been, and now it is gaining UK traction and it looks like it's going to be rolled out across the whole of the UK, but that is really important to understand. It's also important to understand that no one size fits all, and I was talking to my team about this morning, about how even we could work in 2 very similar cities to each other, but the needs are very different to each other. So we can't just roll out projects in one town or city, which we can then pick up and roll out in another necessarily. They will all need slightly tweaking. And then kind of question that I was asked to cover, which was how do questions of culture, migration, integration, and internationalism manifest in the management of cities after dark? We're starting to see towns and cities move away from the 1830s and purely nightclubs as the sole offer in their area. I think this is a really positive move. It's not because I don't believe in nightclubs. I grew up in the rave generation of the 90s and put on raves regularly throughout the 90s. I'm a big passionate supporter of the electronic music industry. However, we do need to make our city centre accessible to all the community. And we are starting to see more communities building up, particularly in cities, of things like older people moving into cities because it's easy for them to walk around, it's easy for them to access retail. And so therefore there needs to be an offer for the older community in our city centres at night. They have the grey pound, as we like to call it. They have a lot of money, a lot of spare time, and they do like to go out. We do need to make sure that we are servicing things like Asian communities, Chinese communities who don't drink as much, and also the younger people. We're now starting to see from the Global Drug Survey the amount of drink young people are consuming is reducing year on year. Drugs are going up, but therefore, how do we put on a non-alcohol offer as well? Families are starting to move back into our cities as retail starts to die. There's also a desire for experiential activities as well. And it is really important that we service those communities, because what we're seeing if we service all of these different communities is that there is less violence, there is less antisocial behaviour. We have lots of evidence to support this, that a much more balanced, accessible nighttime economy does create a safer nighttime economy. We also need to be making sure that we are building in things such as for the LGBTQI community and for the disabled community. And if we look at London as an example, lots of LGBTQI venues are closed. And there isn't really the space for people to go and enjoy a safe night out in the same way. I mean, in one way, it's good to see people blending together. We also need to understand what is culture. So what is culture to all of these different communities that are now blending together in our nighttime offer? And how do we create something that is balanced for all of those people to enjoy? And that means that we really need to create good forward-thinking strategies, not just for the next 1 to 5 years, but 10 years, looking at things like migration and culture, and how do we build in communities. Now, I don't sound Irish, but I am Irish. I moved over when I was young from Ireland, and I remember coming to Nottingham at the time, and over the door of venues were things like no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Now, if I remember that back then, what does it look like to be a person now coming in from a different culture to our nighttime economy? How do we make sure that we're not impacting people of culture in the same way as we did when I first came over to the UK? What have been the impacts of digital technology on the urban night through the pandemic? We have seen businesses transform themselves. So McDonald's is one of my clients. I've worked with McDonald's throughout the pandemic in order to change their operating model in the night. They've gone from a very nighttime offer to now going for a very heavy delivery and order offer. So it's become really important for others to follow suit. So looking at things like creating ordering portals, looking at advertising their offer and creating a blended offer, looking at a creation of online events. And so I've got clients like Boiler Room and Resident Advisor who have gone very much from kind of like doing in-person events to now moving all of their things online, and making sure that there are strategies involved around that to make sure that you can do both things online and, as you start to reopen, do online and in-person events. We also have to think about travel and transport. People no longer necessarily are using public transport in the same way. London's just announced that it's not bringing back its night tube until 2022, probably. I know there's campaigns around that. But also we've seen growth in apps like The Locale, Yoello, Order and Pay, because people are wanting to see whether or not their favourite venues are busy, empty, and therefore do they feel comfortable going to it. And UK research seems to indicate that 30% of people are saying we're happy to go out straight away. A further 30% are saying actually we're going to wait 2 to 3 months before we start to go out. And then there's a final tranche that are saying actually we're going to wait until we've been vaccinated, we're sure that the population's been vaccinated. So I think things like apps and making sure that you feel safe on transport, travel, going into those venues that you want to go to is really important. We are starting to see online global events. So I have a global nightclub operator as a client, and what they're suggesting is they're going to bring in a big named DJ into one of their nightclubs, and then they're going to stream it out to all their other nightclubs. So we're looking at things like that changing, because I've never been to a nightclub where there's not been a live DJ before. That's really part of the whole nightlife for me, but actually, how do we cut down on costs, and how do we make sure that some of our big stars aren't having to travel as much, and how does that impact the environment? Virtual reality, I have a client who's a virtual reality provider, and I was just on the phone to them before I came here, and we're looking at how do we push on that kind of virtual nightclub idea. How do we bring into things like NFTs so we can bring in advertising and support as we build these virtual communities and mix them with existing real life activities as well. And given then how nightlife in cities COVID-19, what research and interventions are necessary to aid recovery and foster more equitable cities at night, we've become really familiar now with the challenges facing hospitality and nighttime industries. As part of this, we are working with towns and cities where retail is now closed, and we're looking at working with promoters and theatre producers in order to enliven meanwhile spaces and the use of ex-retail units for pop-ups. We're working with landlords in different cities as well to work out how we can utilise those spaces for a mixture of different activities. It's going to become really important for cities to develop supportive policies, things like pavement licenses, the removal of cumulative impact zones, and we've just finished a really big piece of research in London on the impact of the late night levy on London, and that should be being published at the back end of the mayoral election, so over the summer. But in short, late night levy has had no positive impact as far as I am aware. It's really important then to run help sessions. So my team, I've got a team of business support people, and they're working across 6,000 businesses, and we run monthly help sessions in 40 towns and cities to support businesses to get back up and running. It's important to put in place supportive place management, so festivals, activities, events, building footfall, provision of equipment and services, signposting people to relevant industry organisations and government organisations, and then also working to create supportive enforcement. So we're working at the moment to design a nighttime policing course, and we're trialling it with one police force, because we're really aware that no police officer has really had to police the nighttime economy over the last year. And therefore, the police are really concerned about them going back out into the nighttime economy. They've also had a huge recruitment drive during lockdown. And so the force we're working with has had 1,000 new officers during lockdown who have never had to police the nighttime economy at all. So my police expert team are working to create this course to help them to understand. So creating a supportive enforcement environment is really important. Providing mentoring to to venues to enable them to be successful. And we're just in the process of rolling out a COVID aware accreditation for venues and trialing that in 3 cities, whereas if they reach certain standards. We've also had a rave liaison team working throughout lockdown in 3 counties across the UK, and they go with the police forces into raves to go and try and close them down either successfully, help them to operate more successfully or safely as a result. So there is lots of different ways in which police forces, councils can work more supportively with their businesses in their particular area. Have I run out of time?
I think we're out of time, if that's okay.
That's fine.
I'll ask you to wrap up, or maybe we can integrate your comments on this into the discussion afterwards, if that's okay.
Yeah, I've kind of covered a lot of those different things anyway, so yeah, that is perfectly okay. But if anyone's got any questions or wants to give me a ring or talk about it, I'm endlessly chatty, so I'm always happy to get emails or phone calls or tweets.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your fascinating talk. It's really great to hear about the way that you approach nightlife and policy and its fullness and complexity, thinking about the different needs of different cities and different groups within those cities, and the value of having policymakers and people who are governing cities coming from different backgrounds and perspectives. I love the sounds of your nighttime audits, and that really kind of embedded learning and the sensitivity to different spaces and areas. It's fantastic, thank you. So we'll move on now to Mykaell Riley.
Hiya.
Hi, Mykaell. So just to introduce Mykaell, he is an academic, a researcher, a music consultant, a curator, songwriter and producer, as well as a fellow of the Arts and Business and Royal Society of Arts. Mykaell's music career has encompassed TV, film and theatre, resulting in over 11 top 20 UK top 20 positions and 3 UK #1s. He's currently the Programme Director for the Black Music Research Unit and the Principal Investigator for Bass Cultures Research at the University of Westminster. And as part of these projects in 2018, he staged the UK's largest photographic exhibition on the impact of Jamaican music in Britain. Over to you, Mykaell. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to commend the two previous presentations, and I think Joe, who's just speaking, covered some of the points I was going to cover, but that's where we get creative, I guess. I'm going to be looking at creativity and the impact of where we are on creativity and how that feeds into club life at night, let's call it. And I'm also looking at the challenge that creatives have in approaching the time, well, not the time frame, but working at night during the pandemic. And I think, oops, I've just lost my notes. And I think the other component that I want to look at is the challenge posed by actually the government on creatives and the nighttime economy and club life, club activities after dark. So I'm starting with this statement, which was out a couple of weeks ago, which is looking at the government and what this statement actually means for anyone that is involved in creative practice and is creating with an intention actually to perform, and how they're going about that. And I'm going to refer to some extent to the work that I'm doing with my students as well. And, whoops, sorry, so I'm having problems that you can't see on my computer, but I'm okay. So it's looking at creativity and enterprise concerns amongst the Black minority community and the opportunities to perform and to continue earning a living at night. And one of the challenges is the government roadmap and the changing landscape that is constantly presented as to the shifting of lockdown, the removal of lockdown, the numbers of people that can congregate, how they congregate, where they congregate, and the opportunity to earn a living or to plan to earn a living around this. And so to lots of people that I've been in conversation with, they feel that they're part of a social experiment, one that's not been fully explained to them as creatives as to how it works, where they fit in, when they fit in, and if they fit in at all. So there's an anxiety. This anxiety amongst creatives, as I bring up the next slide, this anxiety amongst creatives is paralleled by an anxiety amongst the audience. The public that wants to go out, and they're concerned as to the type of venues that might be available, again, where they might be available, if they'll be available, the cost of going out, how do they purchase tickets, and are those tickets valid? And I say this in the context in some of the work we're doing at the moment that have already recognized that even on the side of tickets, there's already a secondary ticket market that's exploded in a way that no one expected because of the capacity that is available within venues at night, which is a lesser capacity. And we have this audience that has been pent up for 18 months that really wants to get out. And so, young people are buying tickets or looking to buy tickets and realizing that if they're not early, they'll miss out, but also that even the tickets that are available are being bought up by, I was going to say entrepreneurial individuals, but the same type of individuals that was perpetuating secondary ticketing not too long ago. From a promoter's perspective, we've seen any number of enterprising activities to facilitate music taking place safely in the light of government restrictions. And I've used this image to show what some people have referred to as caging, other people have referred to as enterprising effort to keep people safe, where the promoters have created barricades around tables to contain the groups as designated by the government, so 3, 4, 5, 6 people from different houses and what have you. The challenge here has been at night, there's the additional challenge of safety. And safety is a concern that to some extent has been explored during the day. This is an image from what is expected to be one of the first concerts in May the 2nd coming up, where again, in certain communities, it's regarded as a social experiment to see how people behave at a concert during the day. And this will inform how they might implement, I think, police procedures at night. But the concern here, particularly within the Black community, is that with the police, is that they feel that they've been over-policed. The activities over the last 18 months, including responses which in the form of Black Lives Matters, has said that in terms of events, whether it's at daytime or at night, that the Black community is over-policed and with a bias. And so there's a concern as to how policing of activities within clubs will take place, especially for the Black community. With this, there is announcements accompanying this that there will be plainclothes police within clubs. And there is a resistance to this, a resistance to the idea that there's a different level of policing that is going to take place as part of where we are now and how this will impact on activities. My work from a couple of years ago identified that the police will impose different restrictions on Black musicians, Black DJs, Black performers within the club space. That work specifically looked at grime music and what was taking place in London. And the report that I worked on, the grime report, helped get rid of Form 696, which was directly impacting the ability of Black musicians to perform within clubs at night. The focus of this work was on the nighttime economy and the ability to earn a living at night. And it was interesting in approaching this that we had to demonstrate first the opportunity to perform at night, and where and how that took place within venues, within clubs, within festivals and what have you. And then evidence the extent to which police actions were biased and detrimental to individuals' ability to earn. And unfortunately, we were successful. In moving on from that, I can't separate what happens at night from what happens during the day when it comes to live music or music in clubs or music period. This image further, I think, showcases what is being suggested to might take place even within clubs. I can't remember the name of the club, but I was recently speaking about a particular club where the organization within the venue is such that the tables are laid out, 4 to a table within a club, This is the whole dance floor area is facilitated in this way. Everyone that comes in has to wear a mask. You can only take your mask off if you're sitting down at the table whilst music is playing. If you decide you want to dance, you can stand up and dance. You then have to put your mask back on, but you're not allowed to leave your table unless you're going to the bar or going to the toilet. So the whole culture within clubs at night will change to address what is considered safety within that space. But attached to that now is the idea that masks are not going to be worn as we move down the government roadmap. And I started out by saying we're part of a social experiment at night within club spaces, because at the same time, we're being told that in terms of contracting the virus, that is still possible with the variants. And so there's a concern within the audience, even with regards to clubs, that these are not safe spaces. Within the Black community, there is a reluctance to take the vaccine rather, which means, again, in terms of going out at night, there is the community is reserved to some extent to participating, and the jury is still out as to, with a relaxing of legislation, the law and what have you, what type of atmosphere will exist within the club space. So just to round this off, we've got a combination of paranoia amongst creatives as to the opportunity for them to take part as they could have in terms of opportunities prior to the lockdown, and that those opportunities do not exist in the same numbers, at the same level, in the same way currently. There is a concern in terms of safety going into these spaces. And to add to that, there is a concern that... It's 18 hours. Oops, that's my complete computer. There's also a concern that police, plainclothes police, will have an impact on them. This is the Black community, minority communities, in a way that is disproportionate to other people within, other participants within the club space. With that, I would say that the idea of the club space at night is also an alfresco space. It's an outside space, which is why I was showing the other images. The idea that everything will take place inside is actually actively being challenged by promoters and venues, desperately looking at how they can facilitate a kind of inside-outside venue, again, to mitigate risk of infection. Lastly, I would say that given where we are, there is the real concern that any activities within clubs will be reviewed in the next 3 months because of another potential lockdown, which a lot of the promoters I've been in conversation with say, as much as they don't want it, they're expecting that the overzealous audience that is potentially there for venues at the moment will precipitate a further lockdown. So in terms of business and enterprise and creativity, it's a stop-start scenario that we're not yet out of. I think I'll just end there.
Thank you so much, Mykaell. That was a really wonderful synthesis of some of the kind of uncertainties at the moment and impacts of the pandemic on livelihoods and on the reconfiguration of spaces that have historically been, primarily about being in a moment or in an affective space surrounded by other bodies, in proximity. This amazing images that you showed of the live music events and the kind of scrutiny and control that certain kinds of venues are now under through this kind of accelerated moment of governance. So thank you very much. I'm sure people will want to come back to those themes and follow up on those. So thanks. So I'm very pleased now to introduce our next panelist, who is Bryony Benyon. Bryony is a sexual violence prevention specialist, delivering education programs and interventions both independently and for frontline gender-based violence services. She is the co-founder and managing director of the Goodnight campaign. Goodnight helps nightlife spaces transform their approach to harm through policy and accessible training. Bryony advises across a range of sectors, designing training-based interventions aimed at transforming cultures that uphold sexual harassment. Sorry, that can't be right. But, thanks very much, Bryony, and we're really pleased to welcome you to the panel and to hear more about your work.
Thank you so much. Really humbled to follow Mykaell there. I was literally just listening to a podcast with you on it earlier, so literally and metaphorically following you. I'm really happy to be here for the next 10 minutes. I am going to talk about the context for nightlife in terms of gender-based violence, so just a reminder for everyone to kind of be aware of yourself around this sensitive topic. I'm not going to talk in lots of detail, but yeah, just wanted to put that out there. So you've already had a bit of an introduction about who I am. So I'm going to give you some context about the organisation that I'm part of. So the Goodnight Out campaign has been active since 2014. Given that my background is as a facilitator in rape crisis and gender-based violence settings, when I was first started doing that work, I was also really active in my spare time as a touring musician in the kind of queer and DIY punk worlds. And one of the things that I found was a lot of the community-based strategies around safer spaces had interesting levels of effectiveness that varied across the board. And I kind of became quite passionate off the back of personal experience about how to spread that message into different spaces. So we are a specialist sexual violence training organisation. We work with spaces, cities, communities, and most of the work that we do at the moment is about having built an intervention that is based around the context of safer spaces, but that also has lots of moving parts that aim to support different types of organisations and communities to uplift where they're at in terms of challenging sexual violence. So our mission statement is to support nightlife to both respond to, but also prevent gender-based violence, being really clear about that prevention is a really distinct area of work in and of itself. We talk about more accountable communities for that reason, so that when harm does happen, we start to be able to find new ways and feel more empowered to know what to do and how to respond. We work with lots of different types of spaces. Our kind of bread and butter, I suppose you might say, is nightclubs, venues, bars, clubs and pubs. We wrote what I understand to be the first anti-sexual harassment policy for a UK venue for Fabric in 2015. And we've gone on to support and work with and accredit many different other types of venues, and now are able to support smaller events organisers and really try and bring in more community knowledge to the work that we do, but also scale it up and look at when we are working at a citywide level, whether that's with London's NITE or with different councils around London and beyond, what it means to adapt this into different contexts. I think at the latest count, it's definitely over 200 nightlife spaces that we've sort of officially accredited, and we support and advise many more. And we've trained over 3,000 nightlife workers. I want to talk a little bit about where we come from sort of politically in terms of why we do this work. We're a community interest company rather than a charity, which means that we can be both big and small p political in this work. We believe that nightlife should be about fun and freedom, and we take both of those things very seriously and see them as part of a kind of a liberation politic. I'm sure everybody who's on this Zoom call, if we had enough time to do a guided meditation, could close their eyes and remember the last time that they were really on a dance floor, and that feeling of total transcendence and freedom is one that I'm sure that we've all pined for over the last year, but it is also one that the access to is variable depending on lots of both structural and interpersonal factors. But we believe that everyone should have access to that, and that nobody should feel fear when they're in a nightlife space. In terms of what those what that kind of belief builds into as values, we take a gendered approach to this, which means that we understand that it isn't something, gender-based violence isn't something that everybody just does to each other on an equal level. We also believe that from the community perspective, everyone can play a role in changing this, but we do have to hold and remember that people make choices to cross boundaries, to harass, to harm, to spike, etc. And we have to put the focus on that when we're thinking about interventions and campaigns that unfortunately often put far too much of the onus on the victim rather than the perpetrator. Connected to that, we work with the nightlife economy. We're not kind of campaigning against it. We love venues, pubs, bars and clubs, but we also believe and hold kind of really primary that there is that duty of care there when we bring people together into a space to be proactive and respond when these things happen. The training work that we do is around empowering workers, acknowledging that often nightlife workers are themselves experiencing high levels of gender-based violence and often are part of a workplace culture where it's almost seen that it's part of their job. And we do a lot of work to try and challenge that and challenge the sometimes hierarchical thinking in venues and clubs that can result in people feeling like they can't access support when that happens to them at work. And then finally, we believe in robust policies, practices and cultures to make sure that, if venues are, for example, putting up a poster, that actually can do more harm than good if they haven't also trained their staff on what to do if people say, oh, excuse me, I saw your poster, can you help me? So we really have to approach this as a kind of whole venue intervention. I've used the word gender-based violence quite a lot already. That is a very broad term that can mean lots of different things, but I just wanted to focus people's minds as we do in our workshops and our sessions to be aware of the fact that we might have very different ideas of what that means and what could commonly happen in a nightclub, but that all of the things that are currently on the screen are absolutely have been a reality in different venues that we're aware of. Things like, suggestive looks, hate-based comments and targeting people are unfortunately, likely every day. Other things might be less common and might have that deeper, longer term impact for the premises, but actually all of these things on every level add up to a kind of cumulative spectrum. And what we want to do is challenge the attitudes that underpin the culture that enables this to happen. In doing that, what we do within our training and within all of the work that we do with premises and with businesses is to actually look at what are the attitudes that people are bringing to work or bringing to the club or the bar. And often, unfortunately, those attitudes are based on myths that aren't factually correct. Those myths could be, things that we might have all heard, like, oh, it's the booze, alcohol causes sexual harassment rather than an individual's choices. Other ones that can be sometimes more pernicious that we may have heard our well-intentioned peers saying, well, we don't have those kinds of problems, thankfully, at our night because we attract the right type of people, or, our scene isn't like that, we're better than that. And then there are, unfortunately, still very common things around people lie about experiencing gender-based violence, and that whether they do that for attention or revenge, this is a matter for the police and there's nothing we can do, which again is just frankly not true. So when we look at challenging sexual violence myths, we want to make sure that we are challenging the culture of normalization that they contribute to, which is the same culture that means that somebody who's got their first job in nightlife might quickly be taught that them having their bum grabbed, which is a sexual assault, is just part of the job and that they need to put up with it. So we want to really challenge that. We believe really strongly that nightlife workers deserve the support and skills to be able to challenge this work, and that they deserve support from their employers as well, so they aren't going to be victimized if they speak up, and that they're going to be supported to step in. We know that this is a workplace issue. Unionization is very low in the sector. These are often precarious jobs, and 100% of the workers that we have trained have said that our training was very or extremely relevant to their role, which I think tells us a lot about the prevalence of this topic and the work that we need to do to challenge it. So those are just some image of our training team on the on that side. Well, the light up dance floor is not the training team, sadly. We don't have one of those yet. Okay, so just briefly, because I'm mindful of the time, a little bit about how we work with spaces. So we built out our intervention to be something that lasts over the course of a year, and we encourage them to kind of get reaccredited and refreshed every year. That's really about pledging to push this issue up the agenda for them for over the course of that year. So we support them with an initial training session and then come in and train staff. We renew that training because there are obviously new starters. Communication and posters is a really key aspect of this, but also having a best practice policy so that staff who are being onboarded really know what the absolute red lines of appropriate and inappropriate behaviour are in that space. Things like debriefing and supporting managers if they've had to make a decision to eject somebody, for example, and are feeling concerned about whether they did the right thing, we do that work with them as well. The fact that we are independent from licensing or the police, etc., or even the council, venues have said to us they really value that as well. So it's kind of having a space where people can take their concerns and their fears and try to do better around this. We believe that nightlife spaces can be an incubator for building better responses to sexual violence, to gender-based violence. And the work that we do is often about encouraging venues to, as was mentioned earlier, kind of audit their practices currently and think about where they might be already strong and where they might be failing, and then kind of figure out from there. Perhaps, you know, they've already got a really good policy, but they've never trained their staff on it. Or perhaps they've got a really strong culture, but they've never written any of that down. So it's as strong as the weakest link. So really important when we do this work that we are kind of listening to the pre-existing skills within a venue and kind of not patronizing anyone either. Just in my last minute or so, which I think I still have, yes, I just wanted to spotlight one recent intervention that I think is a really nice example from us around bringing together best practice from frontline survivor support organisations, in this case Gallup, which is the LGBT anti-violence charity in the UK, and translating that for the kind of the trades audience for the nightlife economy. So this toolkit is about access around LGBT bathroom access in venues, cutting through a lot of the misinformation that unfortunately is out there. If you know the average person running a bar maybe was to Google all gender bathrooms, some of the stuff that they would get would certainly not be based on true facts and reality. So what we put together was aimed at anyone who works in or runs a venue about how to safely and effectively provide options for anyone, regardless of gender, of a space that feels safe for them to use the loo on a night out. And finally, here are just a couple of examples of our the posters. So that when we work with venues, we provide them with a range of different kind of assets and things that they can put up, which just send that message to whoever is there, including staff, that if something or someone makes you feel uncomfortable, no matter how minor it seems, the staff have been trained and they can support you to make sure that it doesn't have to ruin your night. And that can often be the nudge that people need to seek support and to start to realise actually that this behaviour is can be challenged and that the venue should be on their side. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I actually didn't time myself, but maybe that frees us up a bit of time as well. All my contact details are there. Really looking forward to having the conversation.
Thanks so much, Bryony. That was fantastic. I'm a big fan of Goodnight Out campaign, as you know, and I had the honour of collaborating with Bryony and Gallup on the Toilets Toolkit, which I can't recommend highly enough. They've done such a fabulous job, and it's incredibly informative and beautifully put together and illustrated, so do check that out. It was really great to hear more about Goodnight Out campaign and the potential and possibility for working across different scales, for collaborating with government entities, as well as working with venues in this really context sensitive way that thinks about particular venue needs and the need to support staff, and particularly that policies aren't enough. They need to be implemented, right? And support the staff need to be supported and feel confident in doing so, as well as kind of being able to go to venue managers around issues that they need to them to address and be supported with as well. So finally, I'm going to introduce our last speaker, Philip Kolvin, QC, who is a barrister specialising in licensing and the leisure economy, from pubs and clubs to festivals. Philip's a patron of the Institute of Licensing, an associate fellow of Westminster University, and the author of several books in the field. He's the former chair of the Institute of Licensing, the Nighttime Commission for London, Best Bar None, and Purple Flag. Over to you, Philip.
Well, thank you very much. And I've got to say, I've got loads to apologise for. The first is that I just didn't bring a PowerPoint. I've sort of come naked into the debating chamber. And the second is that before we joined, we had a little meeting, and I said I'd probably just agree with everyone. And Ben Campkin, I thought rather evilly, said, no, it'd be much more fun if you disagreed with everyone. And so I've just got to report that my misfortune is I agree with just about every single thing which has been said by this very distinguished panel, with a single exception. That's something Bryony said, I wrote down. She talked about the total transcendence and freedom we've all experienced on the dance floor. And I've got to say that, you know, my dancing is so execrable. I've never experienced that. All I've experienced is complete humiliation. So I'm sorry, Bryony, you're going to have to take me out and show me a good time or something on some night. Who knows? I can't dance. What I'm going to do is just to try and fill in some of the gaps that I think they're more by way of sort of mortar around the great boulders which have been laid by everybody else in 4 areas. And my first area is just to have a little think about what COVID has done to the nighttime economy. And right at the beginning of all this, I wrote a paper with various other people, including Andrena, who's one of the authors on the GNRP, in which I predicted that COVID would just accelerate all sorts of existing trends. And that proved to be not particularly insightful, but it did prove at least to be right. In our country, at least, we were seeing a loss of retail. We were seeing huge challenges to the nighttime sector. We were seeing a huge growth in the online sector at the expense of the nighttime economy. And of course, all of that absolutely happened. COVID also threw great attention on the risks of the nighttime economy, and it's probably fair to say that the nighttime economy is so visible and therefore attracts a greater than expected degree of opprobrium. People can see the alleged harms that the nighttime economy causes. And in this case, it was said, well, the nighttime economy is going to be an absolute laboratory of super spreading. And so the nighttime economy complained bitterly that without any statistical basis, it was shut down in a much more draconian way than any other sector of the economy was shut down. And I thought the pubs and restaurants in particular were making a very fair case that with social distancing and proper risk assessment, they would be much safer than people piling in into people's apartments or wherever they happen to live in large numbers in unventilated rooms, watching the television over a takeaway. In other words, the nighttime economy could have been one of the safest places, but again, attention was thrown on the risks of the nighttime economy. But on the other hand, it's also fair to say that there's probably never been a time when so much focus has been thrown on the benefits of the nighttime economy. Everybody has been desperate to go out. There'll be some people who are a little bit nervous, but people have been bored sick sitting at home or getting their hour a day walking around the park or whatever it is. And so my feeling now is that we've reached a point where the nighttime economy sort of stands on a cusp. It could renew itself, it could go forward from here, it could find new ways of doing business, but equally the damage and the harm which has been done, both economically and in the way people view the nighttime economy, the way people use the nighttime economy and want to use it, so many detriments could now become fixed in. So the nighttime economy really struggles to resurrect itself. So those are a few potted thoughts on the effect of the pandemic on the nighttime economy. The second area I just want to look at briefly is residential and the impact of residential. And it's right to say that in some cities that I can think of, the introduction of mixed use has been a benefit because it's brought people in, it's sometimes brought students in, and it's created an economy around that mixed use. In other areas, as everybody here knows, it has been a detriment. Gentrification has been very difficult because it's created a contested space, and particularly a contested space over the environment and the amenity of local residents living cheek by jowl with the nighttime economy. But I think what we're now seeing is that it's not just an environmentally contested space, but it's an economically contested space. You cannot just assume that the market is going to sort out the right pattern of residential and nighttime economy. If it's going to be sorted out, it's got to be sorted out through proper planning. In our country, the government, in all of its infinite wisdom, has released planning restrictions on residential, which enables all sorts of properties which would have needed planning permission before to be turned into residential, whether they're previously offices or some other non-residential use. And the difficulty that creates is not just more conflict, it also means that there's a danger of losing the critical mass which is needed to create a town centre which is attractive in terms of the nighttime economy. And here, land ownership becomes absolutely crucial. Landlords who are often pension funds, often have got nothing to do with the town and its concerns, will now see an opportunity to convert that rental, which they used to get from a bar, into a great hit where they can get income, a capital receipt from turning that bar into residential, or turning that office space into residential. And unfortunately, a little bit like parkland, once that land is gone, it will never be returned. And if that goes too far, the great danger is that it will send cities into a spiral of decline. For half a century in our country, we've had planners who've guarded very jealously the proportion of uses, whether that's retail or whether it's nighttime economy, whether it's office space and so forth. They're now losing their opportunity to do that. And there's a very great danger that over the next year or two or three, so much of our town centres are signed off to meet the residential housing crisis that the nighttime economy will really struggle to continue at all. And so for that second reason, I would say the nighttime economy is standing at the cusp. And as I think Mirik said, you need cheap property for culture, which has always got a very poor balance sheet. These are always people who are starting off from the bottom. You need cheap property for culture ever to gain a foothold. And if every little space that it was going to gain a foothold in becomes substandard, overcrowded housing, there's a great danger you drive culture out of towns and cities altogether. And that worries me very greatly. My third point is about digital. And there's no question at all that digital has brought great benefits to our towns and cities and to our social economy. And there's no doubt that digital will go on helping at this particular point in time. If you don't like queuing, you can use digital to find out whether you're likely to have to. If you don't want to have too much interface between staff and customers, you can order digitally. If you want to keep crime out of nighttime venues, you can use digital by way of identification. We're seeing an increase in biotech identification as a way of sifting out violent people from nighttime scenes. So that's all, I guess, stuff which we can feel good about. But on the other hand, when I was younger, you had to meet in the pub after work. That was where you went. That's where your friends are, and that's where you'd be likely to meet your next partner. You don't have to do that anymore. You can do all of that digitally. And there's no question also that digital has facilitated the move of retail and services online. So all of those are seismic shifts, and they're very quick shifts in the way that we're engaging with the nighttime sector. But to me, probably the key point is digital as a medium. And I wonder whether this is now going to be a turning point. If you just look at what Netflix did economically last year, Netflix haven't got any interest in cinemas. Netflix would be delighted if every major movie was just released online. It's so much cheaper to get things out to millions and millions of people online than it is to have to support cinemas, which have, you know, wet Wednesdays as well as busy Saturdays. Is all music, is all theatre, is all cinema, is all of that going to move online? Are people going to decide that it's more fun to sit securely with friends in a nice warm environment with a 12-pack of Fosters from Tesco's without having to mix with the hoi polloi, watching a night which they've curated, whether it's on VR or whether it's through an entertainment platform? You know, cinemas have only been around for 100 years. Maybe their day is done. Maybe it's time for them to disappear. And so I'm only painting that just by way of saying this, that towns and cities aren't a given. They only existed because they were places for people to trade and later on for people to exchange ideas, for people to touch other people's skin. Is that necessarily going to be the case? And if it's not the case, then it's not just a turning point for towns and cities, it's a turning point for humanity. And we're living it, and COVID has accelerated it because there's been a step change in how engaged we are in a digital sense with the way we entertain ourselves and meet each other and so forth, and rather than just the trend that was there, which was quick, but not nearly as quick as it is now. So that's my third point about digital. My fourth point is about it's a naked advert for my chapter 6 of Mirik's very brilliant global nighttime recovery plan. And my chapter is what the state can do about all of this. And my point really is that somebody's made a point here about top-down governance, and I agree with that very strongly. The people who govern the nighttime economy are very often different from the people who use it, and they don't understand the nuances. And I thought Joe made some really important points here. The night economy is changing massively. 25% of young people aren't drinking. There's been a growth of a non-alcohol economy, not just ice cream, but street food, the way we engage with food, street performance, music venues, and so on and so forth. Often regulators don't understand that. So in the UK, we've had horrors like the cumulative impact policy, the late night levy, the alcohol disorder zone. It's all about how awful the nighttime economy is, because the nighttime economy is the visible manifestation when so often crime is happening elsewhere. So the way my chapter is structured is that you should start by measuring, and I completely agree with that, and not just measuring the people who come, but the people who don't come. Again, I agree with Joe very strongly about all of that, and it's something which I wrote about when I wrote the London Mayor's vision for the nighttime economy. We have to make sure that our nighttime economies are visible, are accessible to everybody, whether they're old or young or rich or poor or gay or straight or women, whether they're alone or with other women who need protection, whether they love alcohol or never touch the stuff. You ought to be able to engage in these wonderful social environments, because we have to try and promote that. Otherwise, they're going to wither. And if they do wither, we've lost something which I think is rather precious. And also, if we lose towns at night, we lose all that security in towns at night. And we've seen that when you lose the security and venues are shut, then the drug dealers move in and they become dangerous no-go areas. So I say measure, recognize the value of the nighttime economy in all of its manifestations, destigmatize it. It's boring seeing the nighttime economy as just youth-oriented, alcohol-driven monocultures. It's just false. It's not true anymore. And as advocates, we have to try and make that very clear. We have to commit as towns and cities to keeping those economies going, recognizing that they're a major reason for people to live, work and invest in particular towns and cities. And then we need policy, and we need policy which is much more imaginative than just shut everything down or create presumptions against the nighttime economy as a whole. Recognize the nuance and work out what you want to do to promote your town and city culturally. And then crucially, as one of the previous speakers recognized a second ago, implement. You can have as much policy as you want, but you need to implement. And when you've done that, you can then start to measure again and get into the next round. It's really important that the discourse around the nighttime economy has changed, because I feel that we don't have a lot of years left. We have very few years left on climate, but maybe we've got even fewer years left to get ourselves thinking collectively on the nighttime economy. Seminars like this, I think, are absolutely brilliant and crucial to hear the great range of different people who have their different ideas, all leading to the same thing and expressed in all the very different ways. So I feel very privileged to be invited, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Philip. That was brilliant. Again, another brilliant synthesis of some really important issues and shifts. A really great overview, sort of asking us to zoom out and think about these questions of what next, really. So I really appreciate your intervention. And perhaps at this point, I could ask everybody on the panel to switch their cameras back on, if you're happy to. And I posted at the beginning of the chat, I don't know whether you worked this out, but I worked out that you can pin the whole panel if you wanted to, so that you can see each other. So we've had a really amazing and diverse set of interventions. I've learned so much, and thank you for all of the energy and passion that you put into your talks, and you know, it's been a real pleasure to learn about all of the different initiatives that you've been involved with. And I know that some people have already started posting questions, and there's been some dialogue already in the chat box, so that's wonderful. Perhaps before we dive into those, I could take the prerogative of posing another question to you, really. I mean, I've been really interested, and I'm still thinking over the connections between all the things that you've been talking about, because it's been really, really stimulating. But I think there were some consistent themes that came up in your, and apologies, Philip, for asking you to disagree with everyone. I'm glad that you didn't, but I think you were provocative nonetheless. And I think for me, some of the themes that came up were around, well, the impacts of the pandemic on different types of nightlife, the need to not think about the night as a homogeneous monolith, to use, I think Philip used the phrase for monolith, and to think about the diverse ways that that the pandemic will have impacts on livelihoods and experiences, and the future of the night in our cities. But I thought there were also some interesting connections in terms of the sort of discrepancies between attempts to control and govern things and engineer things, and the on the ground in practice realities, but also this kind of exciting way in which different communities of interest coming together through initiatives like the ones that Mirik described, and this new opportunity through digital augmentation, which is our conference theme, around connecting very different places potentially and very different communities to think together about these questions of diversity in the night. So I think I wanted to just ask really well, a couple more questions. One really that I have in my mind is what places have done best in terms of supporting the nightlife industries and cultures through this moment. I mean, I'm really struck by the UK context, which Lo and I are working on, where the government, through the Cultural Recovery Fund, is now supporting, you know, some quite radical businesses, nightlife enterprises in our city, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing that's happening. I don't know, you know, what that will mean in terms of innovation in the sector in the long term, or whether there are even any conditions on that funding. But you know, I think my question really is which governments have done best, or which examples do you have of support that has worked well? And within that, I think one of the things that a few of you have talked about is the kind of the nighttime economy, but the way in which it is pressured by land and property dynamics, and also the way in which it has bound into it quite regressive forms of practice around employment and informality and you know, kind of pop-up modes which make it difficult for people to sustain livelihood. So I'm just wondering also what in your work, what energy or commitment do you see in terms of rethinking those economies at the moment, and are there examples of where that's happening in interesting ways? So yeah, there's a couple of questions there, I think. Yeah, just in terms of whether you can think of any more examples along those lines of the governance or rethinking of the night in terms of economies.
Yeah, I can talk on the Cultural Recovery Fund. We have a team of grant writers who have been working across all of the cultural recovery funds for the UK, so for England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and we've secured 35 million for nightlife industries across the course of lockdown. And those clients are a real broad spectrum, from everything from theatres to electronic music organisations to nightclubs, pubs, etc. And the Cultural Recovery Fund is, I would say, utterly despicable, if I'm honest. We shouldn't be asking our cultural organisations to bid against each other in order to secure money that they should be entitled to have because they've been forcibly closed down by the government. Now, some of the vitriol that some of my clients like Boiler Room and Resident Advisor and things like Boomtown Festival have had as a result of securing this essential funding for them to secure jobs and to look after the industry that they feel so passionate about is utterly unjust. Like, I know some of these people really well, and they have worked so hard to secure nightlife for generations, for the last 20 years in some circumstances. And so to be pitted against each other to secure effectively pittance, like £1 million or £750,000, is bad. We've also seen nightclubs who have traditionally done incredible work in their communities and working with up-and-coming DJs and MCs and artists not be successful and have closed, and as a result of not securing funding. So in one way, yes, the funding looks great on the face of it. Actually, in reality, the hoops that people have to then jump through in order to secure that funding. And if you didn't have a grant writer, like my team have worked tirelessly, it resulted in you not securing funding. Now, we have a 90% hit rate in securing funding for the clients that we work with, but for those 10% also that we wrote them and they were turned down for whatever reason, again, it's absolutely gutting for them, because this is like lifeline funding for them. I had a client unfortunately commit suicide during lockdown because their business, they had a 10-strong nightclub business, completely shut down. His wife left him in the midst of it. His whole world collapsed, and unfortunately he ended up killing himself. Now, no government should be putting a business owner in that situation where they're forced to take their own life because they can't see a way out. So I think I'm quite critical of the UK government and the way that they have looked after nightlife. We've also supported 40 towns and cities and 6,000 businesses, and the constant changing in legislation has created this environment where the staff are terrified to go to work because police are turning up and saying, I'm closing you down because you're not adhering to the legislation properly. And so it's created this kind of environment which is not healthy. We've seen the growth. My rave liaison team, who are working across different counties, have seen an increase in raves of 75% and over weekends, and they're working tirelessly. Like last weekend, working in one county, they attended 200 illegal raves, and that was one team of people. Like, this is huge. We're putting our young people in absolute risk as a result of not protecting nightlife and nightlife venues. So I think I'm considering I sit on the UK High Streets Task Force and was appointed to help shape nightlife and the response. The government have paid no attention to anything that has come out of the night time, have come out of that High Streets Task Force. We've been ignored. Every piece of advice that we have given, and I know the same for the NTIA, who have been working tirelessly, UK Hospitality, who have been working tirelessly. It's been an absolute uphill battle in order for us to get support, any form of support. And then the legislation that's coming out from the government as well. Like, they were giving out legislation the week before we were asking venues to reopen their outdoor areas. In the first iteration of lockdown, they gave out legislation advice 3 days before we were expecting venues to reopen. How any business is meant to respond to legislation coming out 3 days before you're reopening, and training young people who are aged 18 to 25 on how to respond to that. It's really difficult.
Thanks so much, Jo.
Does
anybody else
Sorry,
want
I'm
to
really
come in?
passionate about it.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
become my
I think
lockdown
everyone here is,
bugbear.
and that's great. Does anybody else want to add anything, or from different contexts on those questions? Please feel free to come in.
I mean, can I just very quickly round off what Jo's been saying? Again, I just completely agree. One of the real stings in the tail is going to be that the government imposed a moratorium on commercial repossessions, but they didn't put a moratorium on rents. And that is just a massive ticking time bomb for the nighttime economy. When they get back, they're going to get back to a year of rent bills. And given that rent and staff are the two biggest hits for the nighttime economy, that's a massive problem. The other thing which I've been involved in the last year is litigation about business interruption insurance. And it's been a complete lottery as to whether businesses were lucky enough to have a form of wording on their insurance policy which covered them for closure due to the pandemic, with insurers taking points which would have made Lewis Carroll in Alice in Wonderland, who would have just sort of spun his head. And all those points were forced through into the Supreme Court, where luckily our clients were successful, but lots of other people, just by dint of a little change of phraseology in their policy, were not successful. And that, to me, it shouldn't be a lottery. I mean, people thought they were insured if they were closed down because of a pandemic, and it turned out because of some words on a page they weren't. And that, to me, it feels like a really important state function to ensure businesses, and not, as Joanne says, give them handouts on a rather arbitrary basis through the Cultural Recovery Fund. This is culture. It should be underpinned.
I just want to support what Joe and Philip have said, but I just want to also reiterate the actual creative community, those that create the music, those that the DJs, that community is in meltdown.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing, particularly amongst young males, is mental health. Huge mental health situation, which will come back to haunt us. But it also means that the very DJs, the very people that create the music, the artists, the Cultural Fund hasn't found its way to those individuals.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, you know, I understand the infrastructure, but the core, you know, sound in those spaces has already been disrupted.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Mykaell. It was really interesting. I was talking to my funding team this week, and we were saying that there's a fund that you can apply for if you're an artist called Developing Your Creative Practice, and one called for the PRS fund, the Hitmakers Fund. Now, if I apply for a dancer or if I apply for a theatre maker, then I am about 75% more likely to get funding than if I apply for a DJ or an electronic music artist of some description. And the hoops that my team have to jump through to prove electronic music is an art form in order to secure funding is horrific. Like, they're having to jump way above the bar than somebody who is a classical dancer or a violinist or a theatre performer. And it's not okay. Electronic music is absolutely an art form. It's an essential part of our nighttime economy, and we shouldn't have to be proving at this stage that art is kind of is different in some way. And we're particularly seeing that impact people of colour. So whether that be Asian artists, Black artists, those coming from immigrant backgrounds, and again, they're finding it much harder to get secure funding than those who are from white backgrounds. And again, this is not acceptable. It's not okay, and it has to change. There's nobody on the Arts Council funding background with an electronic music background. And I've been campaigning for this for at least 3 years, asking the Arts Council to put somebody on their funding decision-making board with a background. And I've put forward a number of different people who I think would be excellent people to represent on that, but it's just been stonewalled. But I am not giving up. I'm going to keep trying because I feel really passionate about it.
Thanks so much, Jo.
Pleasure.
And Mykaell. Yeah, so I think, yeah, you're quite clear, certainly in the UK context, that these attempts to intervene have been sort of inadequate and have worsened the issues around the economics of these cultural industries and nightlife industries. I don't know, Bryony or Mirik, whether you wanted to come in at this point, and also we should move to some of the questions in the chat. So yeah, did you have any thoughts, just picking up on the comments other people have made there?
I guess just very briefly, I think something that comes up listening to all of you you speak is the when we think about what happens when people are completely denied that type of support and also need to create in order to live and feel alive, is they take matters into their own hands and, you know, put on DIY events and raves, which in ordinary times obviously would be great. And I think there is a little bit of an issue there with how do we kind of, I guess, show that empathy that you can see why. I mean, 200 in one county, probably a bit excessive in normal circumstances, but, you know, I sort of have a lot of sympathy for that in a way. And I actually can't off the top of my head think of the name, but I'm currently in Berlin, and there's a really interesting initiative here that you probably, someone on this panel definitely knows the name of, where they did I guess a piece of harm reduction around, we know these open air events are happening, what can we do if people are putting their own things on that maybe aren't regulated in that way, just to make sure that there are things like, how do you clean up? How do you make sure that people are looking after each other, even if they are doing those things? Obviously, I think the climate and the appetite for that type of way of thinking about public health interventions into DIY or grassroots or unregulated music is slightly different in the UK to here. But it just felt like a a connector there, that we want to also not demonize young people that are like, do you know what, like, if I can't get any support, I'm still going to try and do it myself.
Yeah, that's so true. That project is called the Free Open Airs. Free Open Airs is that's a project that the Club Commission, Lutz, my partner, he set it up. There were more than 600 people already went to some form of training. They put that together with the Chamber of Commerce. It's very successful. Like the reason why they do that is because from people to go from, let's say, professional amateur to professional is really difficult, and therefore you need to build up a fan base, you need to build up experience, and therefore these free open airs, or raves, actually you can also call them raves, but free open airs is a bit more a nicer name in my opinion, are really valuable to also educate people how they can do things in a better way. And I think we should also not look at nightlife too much or at raves as something to be being bad and a nightclub something being good. I think it's a whole ecosystem, and everybody should have the freedom to pick and choose whatever they think, and we should try to educate people on all levels, wherever they are going. I think the support for nightlife in general throughout this whole pandemic has been so minimal. It's like it has been so clear in the Netherlands. It has been, of course, there has been support for hospitality and for nightclubs in or that's in the Netherlands for their staff, but all of the nightclubs that I know, all of my friends that run venues or festivals have minimized their staff, or they had to fire everyone basically. But also, I think what is also a group which is not really seen is like the people that supply to these industries. So booking agencies, talent agencies, they are people have worked for 10 years building their careers, building their rosters, and they have really had to let go all of their staff, and those people are definitely not taken care of. I think also the way that how governments approach the pandemic also show that the night is still demonized. It has been demonized for 2,000 years, and it really shows that although we are passionately advocating this for more than 10 years, it's very difficult to come to really reach those higher levels where people really do understand and see what the value is. I'm afraid that nightlife will become more exclusive, that prices will go up, that the prices for drinks will go up, that if there is a real estate which is maybe cheaper, then I don't think people that bought then that real estate which might be cheaper, that then will give that space out for people to use it on an affordable rate. They will just buy it, wait till the moment when they can maximize their profit. So I don't really see. So I'm also I'm not so optimistic about the future. The near future, I'm very optimistic about, in the sense that it's great that we will reopen, everybody will come together again. But I'm also afraid what will happen after the summer, when everybody have met with their friends again. You've met with your peers. You had a bit of that sense of belonging from, oh, I know again to which community I'm connected to, because that's something which is really missing at the moment. You don't really know what you are. You're only looking in the digital space. In the digital space, I don't think is you get really quickly. You're only looking in one direction really quickly, and so I really hope that the venues and the nightlife space can take over that role again, in also showing how diverse the world actually is. That's also what the night is for, and I also hope that there's a lot of cities are now looking, of course, at data and tracing and all that stuff. I really hope that data gathering is not going to be pushed as a solution for safety. Safety is safety. It comes through community and to training and education, like Byron was saying, and to the good night out, those kinds of the community is there to create safety, not like data gathering, and cities and companies are so data hungry at the moment. So I really hope that that we can you know, yeah, then that the vaccination will go quick, and that we can do nightlife again in the way that people have the ability to express themselves, and everybody, you know, that let's say the banker can dance next to the trucker, and can dance next to the politician, and there's a space to meet with who you want to meet, and not have to share with who you're hanging out with.
Good points.
Thanks so much, Mirik. Lo, did you want to come in?
Yes, apologies. My computer just, my Zoom just crashed, so I've kind of popped out and come back in again. I think my internet connection is a little bit unstable, so that's why I don't have my camera on. How are we doing for time, Ben? Do we have time for another question?
I think we have time to, maybe we could just bring out a few of the questions from the chat. I know some have been responded to already. And then we could ask everybody just to make one final comment picking up on those. Does that sound okay?
Certainly.
And
yeah, certainly.
Feel free to chat in the box as well. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to turn my camera off for a second because I have to go and deal with the howling dog. I'll be back in 1 second.
Howling wolf, surely. Surely, Ben.
So from Sarah Blandolero, who leads up the NITE project, she's asked Mirik, but I think this is a question that is relevant to everybody. It's around kind of the recovery from COVID against the background of increasing property prices and rents, experiences of advocating against this. I know in Ben and I's work on LGBTQ nightlife, it's really clear how culture often happens in spaces that are more affordable, and then the forces of gentrification and regeneration have negative impacts on that, and that's, you know, common for various kind of forms of culture and venues. So anyone's thoughts on that would be great. Another question that was asked that I'll bring in is Robert Shaw, who's asked about tensions between kind of top-down governance, so the involvement of big brands and policing, for example, and creating space for bottom-up creativity. And personally, something I'm thinking about, and that I think that Joe and Mykaell and Bryony's talks particularly spoke to was around, I'm wondering about approaches to accountability and safety that don't involve the police as a kind of formal force, which is so important when certain communities, particularly Black communities, also LGBTQ communities, have often a quite difficult relationships with the police, to say the least, and experiences of really extreme over policing. So I'd be interested in, Mirik, also if you're aware of any alternative approaches to policing that you've seen in your work. I'd be fascinated to hear that.
Yeah, so the first one is, you know, one of the biggest issues which I see is that the business models of cities is to develop the land, and that is why really often, you know, creative communities are the victims of their own success. You know, they are being brought in to help to develop neighborhoods, and really often, like, you know, in some ways I think it's good. You know, I of course I've done it myself as well. You know, you also yeah, you're gonna take that cheap rent for 3 years to having, you know, a 40 square meter studio for 200-300 euros. But I think what cities need to realize, and where politicians need to make strong decisions, is saying, let's keep at least a certain percentage of the neighborhood for creativity, and make sure that these spaces are there, and that we also lock it in, not for 5 or 7 years, just 40 years. Then this will, you know, then these creative spaces will be cultural hotspots, and it's a long-term investment, long-term investment. I hope that we will see, or one of the ideas we're playing with, and which we will hope to see the light, is that creative spaces will be bought through a decentralized offering, you know, or via blockchain technology, that a really large group of people crowdfund a space, and that's the reason why that space is being bought, or why that space can exist for a longer period of time, instead of only being there for being grabbed by property development. That is first question. Second question, I'll try to be brief. I think that when it, maybe let somebody else answer the question on policing and criminalization. I have some ideas, but I know we're almost running out of time, so maybe please somebody else would like to jump in.
Thanks so much. Mykaell, do you have any thoughts or responses?
Just very briefly, in that looking at recent government statements, looking at recent reports, and what it said about institutional racism within the force, it's not a happy picture that's being painted here in terms of coming out of the lockdown, in terms of policing in association to club activities or nighttime activities, especially for the Black and minority community. It suggests that the government is in denial of in denial of a reality that most of us live through on a daily basis. And if you go out at night, it's particularly real. And, you know, just to broaden it, even the response to that unfortunate lady that got murdered, and the female community came out, and the way the police reacted to that, it shows a clear disconnect between the policing of the community, the government, and what the community actually wants to happen. So I don't think within the arts, within the nighttime economy, within clubs, it's any different. There is a disconnect between the state and the people at the moment. And I think in terms of the people, I just think I agree with the whole blockchain idea. There's lots that's happening around blockchain and NFT and art, where a global community is coming together to challenge individual governments. I think it's happening. It's not obvious yet, but it is happening out there.
Thanks so much. Bryony, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, yeah, adding to or building on what Mykaell said there about the response to the tragic murder of Sarah Everard. Not only the horrendous events at the bandstand in Clapham, but also the response then that was immediately to call for undercover police in nightlife venues, which I think right across the board, from organisations like ours that took a very I guess openly kind of the police don't keep our community safe and we have other ideas for that and this isn't what we need, right through to more I guess larger bodies that have to maybe phrase it carefully, but even they were openly against it. And I think it backed the government into a corner to realise that there is a community of practice, particularly in the context of gender-based violence, that I can speak to, that we know what works in terms of prevention, we know what works in terms of safety. Communities have been, I guess, we've internalised the idea that we are de-skilled when it comes to dealing with situations of violence, when in fact the reality is that more often than not, when police are called in, is that they end up escalating tensions, or even in that case are actually the perpetrators of the violence. So from the Goodnight Act perspective, we do lots of work around kind of building community responses after harm has happened, particularly in creative communities where, there are these kind of more public call outs for accountability and that type of thing, and trying to move that away from a social media based theatre and into something that is more practical about how we can support each other. Only 1 in 6 people ever report their sexual assault to the police, which tells us that there's a massive cohort of people that need support, and we have it in each other to do that work. So I think there are alternatives for sure. It's the only option we have, I think.
Thank you so much. Jo, do you have any closing thoughts in response to the themes we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think policing is a really interesting one, and one of the reasons we're developing this nighttime economy policing course is because the police have realised that there is a real disconnect between the way that they have traditionally policed the nighttime economy and communities who just don't trust them, and the impact of going in with big yellow jackets into a nightlife environment, when actually it could be done in a much more supportive, holistic way, and we need to be able to hold them to account for their actions. We believe that that venues, that arts organisers should be able to police themselves and should be empowered to do so. So we developed a course, for example, with Drinkaware a number of years ago, called the Club Crew, which was about empowering people in the club to be able to spot the signs of vulnerability. We've developed vulnerability management courses and training that we've rolled out with venues in order to, again, get those people working in venues to spot the signs of vulnerability and deal with it before it becomes an issue. And we've just filmed a new course for Pub Watch on that as well. So in terms of getting those people in venues to self-police and self-support. So yes, there is plenty that can be done that doesn't involve big yellow jackets and burly men rocking up and scaring the life out of people when actually they're not doing anything really wrong at all. They're just having a lovely time and being young. So yes, I think there's much more, and that was the whole reason around the rave liaison team as well, was taking the police out of rave liaison and dealing with raves, and putting in people who are experienced in raves in order to deal with people and teach them how to run a rave safely. So effectively similar to the German method, and it has been really effective. It's worked well where it's been rolled out. So I'd love to see things like that rolled out as well across the UK.
Really interesting. Thank you. Philip, do you have any very brief final thoughts before?
Yeah, I mean, I came into this with the idea that COVID had been a massive accelerant, and between that and digital and other things, we really needed to sort of set a new discourse in order to preserve the nighttime economy and allow it to thrive in future. But I actually, as I've been listening to all these wonderful contributions, I just want to sort of propose something different, which is that we should see the night as a sort of battlefront. And ranged on one side of the front is top-down government and big business, and their aim is to sanitize, it's to supervise, and it's to maximize in terms of maximizing capital and maximizing, you know, commercial space and so on. On the other side, you've got the nighttime economy, which always thrives by being a bit edgy, by being a bit risky, by being unfunded, non-monetized, and a space where small independents, young people are allowed to thrive, experiment, fail without too much suffering. And so actually what this battle is about keeping spaces edgy, and whether towns and cities can accommodate that in future. I can't dance, but I very much hope that we pull that off.
Thank you so much. Ben, would you like to close? Have you got any closing thoughts? Or are you busy documenting?
Sure, it might be somebody else speaking alongside me. No, thank you so much, everybody, for your really amazing contributions. It's been really mind-expanding to hear about all of these initiatives and to really take stock of what's happening now and to hear your expert views on the situations that you're engaged with and also what will happen next. And I don't think that we've done justice to all of the comments in the chat really, and I wonder if there's a way that we can circulate those to the group afterwards in case people do want to follow up with these individuals. But I hope that you'll also be able to participate in the other conference sessions over the next day. So yeah, just thank you very much for your time and contributions and for giving us your insights.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.